Hey everyone, I hope y'all are having a great day, and today I'll be reviewing The Astonishing Color of After by Emily X.R. Pan. A couple of months ago, I did a top 5 video on writing crushes, meaning authors whose writing styles I really love and really admire. And in the comment section of that video, I saw a couple of people list Emily X.R. Pan as one of their top 5 writing crushes, which I thought was really interesting because I know that this is her debut and only novel out. So based on this book alone, her talent was apparent enough that people immediately put her on their top 5. I've heard really good things about this book, and I actually just registered for a library card at my city library. So I decided to check this out, like literally check it out, and read it before I have to go back to school. So The Astonishing Color of After is about a girl named Lee who is half white, half Taiwanese. Her mother is Taiwanese and she has suffered from depression for a really long time, and she ends up dying by suicide within the first, I think, chapter of the book. Lee is understandably shattered by this, but she's convinced that her mother has turned into this giant red bird after death, and this bird tells her that she should go to Taipei to meet her maternal grandparents. Now, Lee has never met this side of her family. She does not speak any Taiwanese. She barely knows any Mandarin, but she finds herself in Taipei anyway, uncovering secrets about her family. This book surprised me in so many ways. I didn't realize when I picked it up that the mother died by suicide, and so this book was definitely a lot darker than what I imagined it to be just by looking at this cover and reading the title, The Astonishing Color of After. That sounds very whimsical, and this book is, but it also is very serious. What's super interesting to me about this mental health angle is that it's about an Asian American woman who suffers from depression. And from experience, I can tell you that Asian Americans do not talk about mental health the same way that white Americans do. It's always so jarring to me to go from my university, where mental health is kind of a big deal, and even the chancellor launches these campaigns about talking openly about mental health and trying to reduce the stigma, to going home where my parents don't really understand the issue at all. Like, my parents have said on multiple occasions that they don't understand why young people have a reason to be depressed. And the thing is, my parents watch my videos even though I beg them not to. So it's not like I'm attacking them for not having the same foundational knowledge about mental health that I do because I grew up in America in this specific time. But it's absolutely undeniable to me that the cultural differences in the way that mental health is discussed and even validated are so stark and so large. So seeing this woman who grew up in Taiwan move to America, try all these different therapies and all these different medications, that was so new to me. It was so new to see this particular intersection of representation. And I know Emily X.R. Pan specifically wrote about this topic because she herself lost a family member to suicide. And I'm glad she writes about it, even though I'm sure it was painful for her, because it feels like validation. Another thing that surprised me was the writing. Emily X.R. Pan is a beautiful writer. She's so capable, and she really shows off her emotional range in this book. She's so effective at writing grief, but also teenage angst and love. The themes of this book revolve a lot around family, and she writes about family so realistically and so beautifully. The family dynamics are absolutely spot on, but she also kills it when writing chemistry. The scenes between Lee and her best friend slash love interest, Axel, they smolder right off the page. Something I loved so much about this book was the setting. For the most part of the book, we are in Taipei with Lee and her maternal grandparents, and Emily X.R. Pan does her best at vividly creating the city. She focuses a lot on food, which I think is really exciting. The thing is, in terms of food, I've always felt very lucky growing up in an Asian American household because I feel like I have double the perspective on food than someone who grows up in a household where they just eat one kind of food. Like, growing up, it wasn't unusual for me to be introducing the children at my lunch table about new foods that they didn't know existed. I'd be like, this is a persimmon. Like, because I grew up in the household that I did, I knew about foods that other people near me didn't know existed. And reading this book with all the foods that Emily X.R. Pan writes about made me realize that although I have maybe a wider perspective than someone who grew up in a household where they just ate one type of food, I still have such a limited perspective. There are still so many foods out there that I absolutely know nothing about. And that's kind of sad to think about because I love eating, and it's just inevitable that I will die missing out on an infinite amount of incredible food just because I won't have had the opportunity to try it or be exposed to it. Isn't that crazy to think about? There's just an infinite amount of food that you don't even know exists. But anyway, that's a little bit of a tangent. Emily X.R. Pan does an excellent job at capturing a fragment of this cultural landscape, not only through food, but also through different locations and different traditions. She takes these things and she just paints it on the page. So there are a lot of things that I liked about this book, but inevitably, this is a book basement review, you know, so there are some things things that did not work for me. One was the plot itself. There's this cyclical pattern of Lee burning incense to reveal family memories, and then she'll go into her own personal memories based on her own experience, and then we'll go back to real time with her grandparents. And every time we launched into these memory episodes, it all felt so repetitive. It's like clockwork, we're hitting point A and B and C and then going back to A again. And although I liked the story, I do think that the execution of the plot could have been more inspired. There's also a lot of synesthesia in the book. Everything has a certain color to Lee. She like speaks in colors and she feels emotions in colors. And sometimes, not gonna lie, it just got to be a little much for me. Like, a scream might be an indigo and then her heart will feel vermilion. And like, I get it, that's the concept of the novel, you know, the astonishing color of after. But maybe I'm just like a little too cynical for this. I didn't always buy it. Sometimes the writing did border on Tahara Mafi level. I think sometimes Tahara overshoots beautiful and then lands on obnoxious, like where it just doesn't even make sense anymore. And at first I was scared that Emily XR Pan would fall into that territory. There's one instance where Lee says, "He smells like sleep." And I'm like, what does that mean? Does he smell like drool or like wet hair or old sheets? Like, is this a good smell or a bad smell? I can't tell. But despite those times where the writing was slipping into dangerous territory, for the most part I thought it was really, really lovely. I'm going to go into a spoiler section now, so if you haven't read The Astonishing Color of After, I'd advise leaving in 3, 2, 1, bye. Something I think Emily XR Pan captured so incredibly well is the teenage angst and bitterness of Lee's character. Lee has so much bite when she's talking to her father, and then she has so much bitterness towards Feng, and I found that to be so realistic, you know, because it's like, we know as a reader that Feng is just trying to be generous, she's just trying to help out, but I also found it so easy to tap into Lee's bitterness because it just took me back to when I would act the exact same way. Something that didn't work as well for me was just how obnoxiously dramatic the plot was at the beginning of the book. The fact that her father would just storm out and leave Lee at her grandparents' house indefinitely without explaining anything, I thought was so absurd. And then his explanation at the end for why he left like that was so unsatisfactory. It felt like the author just needed the dad to leave in order for the story to proceed the way she wanted it to, but then she couldn't think of a good enough reason for him to leave. I loved the storyline with Feng. When I first met her, I was like, oh, is this Dory's sister perhaps? But then like, they said she was college age and I felt like that wouldn't really make sense. And then we later found out that Dory's sister died, and so I was like, okay, well, I guess that's not her. But then it was! It ended up being her! I loved that. I loved the magical elements of this book with the gifts and the ghosts. Like, sometimes it felt a little spooky, but I never didn't like it. It must be truly devastating for these grandparents to have lost both of their children. I think the grief of being a parent and losing your child before you die is probably one of the worst in the entire world. And for that to happen twice with both of your children, like, that's just excruciating. On that happy note, The Astonishing Color of After was magical and mysterious and stunning. And I really, really enjoyed it. I didn't think it was perfect, but I still liked it so much. Also, I didn't mention this before, but even the side characters are diverse. Like, Axel is half Puerto Rican, half Filipino, and Caro is queer. The story was good. The writing was gorgeous. Emily XR Pan has written herself such an impressive debut novel. If you've read this book, please let me know your thoughts on it. I would love to hear them, whether they're good, bad, in between. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you'll have a fantastic day and happy reading. Bye!